What's up, guys? Welcome to G Whiskey. My name's Jeff. Now, this is a channel where I offer my thoughts and opinions on a specific whiskey, and once in a while, I'll throw in a clickbaity list too. That sounds interesting? Hit subscribe down below. And with that out of the way, why don't we jump into our list? Today, we're talking about 5 great sherried whiskeys ruined by low ABV. Stick around. The list we're doing today is a top 5 list, and it's going to be 5 sherried expressions that are ruined by a lower ABV. And by lower ABV, I mean 40%. Generally speaking, 43% is also considered a low ABV, but there's actually quite a few whiskeys that I enjoy at 43%. 40, on the other hand, is the cutoff. Personally speaking, that is where your ABV is just too low and your whiskey tastes weak and watery. For those of you who don't know, 46% ABV is widely accepted as the minimum amount you'll need in order to be considered a craft whiskey or just a whiskey of higher quality. Now, for the purposes of today's list, we're only going to be discussing entry-level expressions, which is to say more affordable whiskeys. If we were to be discussing more premium expressions that come in at 40%, that would warrant an altogether different video. One thing to keep in mind about this list is that I actually don't think any of these whiskeys are bad. In fact, the opposite. I chose these 5 whiskeys specifically because I think they're good. Unfortunately, they've been done a disservice by that low ABV. So just to recap our criteria, all of our whiskeys here should be otherwise delicious despite the low ABV, which of course is subjective. They should have an entry-level price tag, they should all be at least gently sherried, and they should come in at 40%. Now, I did make this list off the top of my head, so I'm sure there's plenty of other whiskeys out there that didn't make the cut. So if you can think of a sherried whiskey that squandered its potential with a lower ABV, do let me know what it is down in the comments because, like I said, I'm sure I've missed some. Another thing to note is that this list is in reverse order. We're going to go from 5 to 1. And if you stick around past 1, I'll be telling you what's in my glass here. I have a beautiful sherried whiskey with me. Stick around to the end. I'll let you know what it is. And finally, all of this is, of course, totally subjective. So with that out of the way, why don't we hop into our list? And in the meantime, if you can kindly leave a like down below, that'd be greatly appreciated. So we'll kick things off with a couple dishonorable mentions. Our first is going to be Deanston 12 Sherry Oak, which is one I reviewed not too long ago. Now this is actually a beautiful whiskey with some really nice complexity to it and a lovely sherry touch. But in a very out of character move for Deanston, the brand opted to bottle it at 40%. The reason this didn't make the proper list is that this whiskey is a Taiwan exclusive, so it doesn't apply to any other markets, but it's an interesting case because no one else knows about this whiskey, and while the rest of the world is busy applauding Deanston for their craft approach to making whiskey, for staying very consistent with their specs, here in Taiwan we actually have a couple Deanstons that fall short thanks to a lower ABV. Next up we have the Aberlour 12, which is an extremely widely available one. This is probably one of your bigger 12-year-old single malts on the market. Everyone knows about it, big brand, big seller, and it actually legitimately does taste good. It's got some nice flavors to it, but again, falls short thanks to the ABV. Now the reason Aberlour didn't make the cut on the proper list is that we actually do have an alternative to this whiskey. Aberlour has another 12-year-old on the market. That one comes in at 48% and it's non-chill filtered. Although apparently the formula for the 48% version is slightly tweaked from the regular 40%. So while it's not exactly the 40% cranked up to 48%, it is close enough that we can call it an alternative. We do have a more substantial Aberlour 12 on the market and the price isn't even that much higher. So that's going to be it for our honorable mentions. Why don't we hop into our proper list, starting with number 5. So we're going to kick things off with Dalmore 12. Dalmore, another big seller. This is a brand that is very divisive. Casual consumers seem to love Dalmore. They do have beautiful bottles. Meanwhile, people in the whiskey community tend to despise it. Dalmore is of course famous for very low ABVs in general, no age-stated whiskeys, and their flagrant abuse of E150A or caramel colorant, all of which are cardinal sins in the world of whiskey. So yeah, Dalmore does get some hate. We're starting things off with our 12-year-old here because as it stands, this actually isn't a great whiskey, but it does have some nice notes. So if we got rid of that caramel colorant, which is completely unnecessary, if we cranked our ABV up to 46%, I see no reason why this wouldn't be a very solid sherried whiskey. But Dalmore actually does have a really nice house style once you look past all the nonsense, and they proved that last year with their Sherry Cask Select 12-year-old, which is quite different from the regular one. Now that one still does have caramel colorant, it's still a lower ABV, it comes in at 43%, but it's got a lot more character and a lot more complexity than your standard 12. So if you're wondering which one to buy between the standard and the Sherry Cask Select, absolutely go for the Sherry Cask Select. Meanwhile, our regular 12 just feels like a softer whiskey. It doesn't have much weight or much heft behind it. Overall, the whole whiskey experience with the 12 is kind of meh. But tell you what, Dalmore bottles sell like crazy and they're sitting pretty comfortably in their corner of the market. So they're never going to change this one, but it does make our number 5 because it could be a better whiskey. Our number 4 is going to be a little bit more obscure, especially for those of you watching from the UK or the US, but for the few of you out there who are watching from Asia, you're probably quite familiar with this one. I'm talking here about Glen Ord 12-year-old from Singleton. Now, Singleton is a subsidiary of Diageo, and they're basically an umbrella brand with several single malts under their wing. For those of you watching from the West, you might know Singleton from its Dufftown releases, but here in Asia, Singleton of Glen Ord is going to be a lot more prominent, and having tried the Dufftowns, the Glen Ord line is actually the better line. I think they make better whiskeys. Speaking of our 12-year-old here, this is actually a really nice whiskey. It's got some beautiful flavors in it. It's got some very sweet, juicy raisin notes, dates, really nice flavors. We have some decent complexity here, some darker sherry notes, but as is the theme of our list, it just comes across really light. Now, Glen Ord is a more obscure distillery. They don't get much exposure to the wider market except for the releases under the Singleton banner, and that's actually kind of unfortunate because a lot of their whiskeys come in at 40%, even some of their more premium expressions. So the brand rarely gets a chance to actually flex its muscles, which feels like a missed opportunity. Our number 3 is another famous one. It's a big international bestseller. Next up, we've got the Highland Park 12. Now, the Highland Park 12 is a little bit unique on this list. I actually see it as something of an all-rounder when it comes to Scotch. And I actually think it's a little bit more justified than some other whiskeys on this list in keeping a lighter profile. And I say that because it's got a lot of different elements and flavors that you're going to find in Scotch combined into one bottle. You have stuff like peat, sherry, you have some malty notes, some floral notes. It's all in there. So in a sense, I see Highland Park 12 as something like a single malt counterpart to whiskeys like Johnny Walker. It combines a lot of the fundamental flavors of Scotch in a way that's very accessible and light. So it's a great introduction to Scotch whiskey. I would offer this to someone who's just getting started. It'll kind of acclimate them to the kinds of flavors that they can expect from single malts. Now, of course, if it was up to me, any whiskey that comes in at 40% or even 43%, I would want to crank the volume up on that ABV to a minimum of 46%. But whiskeys that come in at 40% are, of course, going to have a much smoother, softer profile. And while that doesn't really interest me, I do totally understand why the market needs it. Now, speaking personally, I do like Highland Park. I like their house style. I even think the 12 is a decent whiskey, but after you've graduated to bigger and better whiskeys, coming back to a whiskey here at 40% does feel like a step down. For our number 2, we're leaving Scotland, we're heading over to Ireland. We're going to be looking at the Redbreast 12-year-old, and that's the standard release of the Redbreast 12. This is a beautiful whiskey. It's not very heavily sherried, but you do have a nice sherry touch in here. Overall, just really beautiful stuff, but of course, too light. Now, some of you out there might be thinking, Jeff, you didn't put Aberlour 12 on your proper list because you have an alternative out there at 48%. Why is it you're putting Redbreast 12 on the list when we have a cask strength on the market? The answer to that is price. So our Aberlour 12 at 48%, still a reasonably affordable whiskey. Our Redbreast 12-year-old is a more premium priced product. So I wouldn't call it a viable alternative because it's in a completely different price category. But not only that, it's in a completely different category of quality. Our Redbreast 12-year-old is a massive step up from our regular 12-year-old. Whereas if you look at Aberlour 12 at 40%, jumping up to Aberlour 12 at 48%, that is a nice bump in quality, but nowhere near as dramatic. If you've had the Redbreast 12 at cask strength, by the way, then you know that one is an absolute killer, and it also paints a pretty clear picture of what a hike in ABV can do to a whiskey's quality. Now back to our regular 12, of course this is a nice whiskey, it's got some great flavors, and it's a nice introduction to Irish whiskeys, but as it stands at 40%, it is a little bit too light. It does leave me wanting. Even if they bumped it up a little bit to something like 43%, of course ideally 46%, that would elevate the whiskey dramatically. And now on to our number 1. Now a lot of you out there might have seen this one coming. This one is a sales behemoth. It is the brand that people think about when they think of classy and sophisticated Scotch whiskey. Of course, I'm talking about our Macallan 12. More specifically, the Macallan 12 Sherried Oak. Now, say what you will about Macallan, but this is a brand that knows how to market themselves. Now, Macallan does have a few 12-year-olds on the market, but we're looking at the Sherried Oak. That's probably their most iconic 12-year-old. It's a great display of the kind of luxurious, sophisticated flavors that we get from the brand. Macallan does sherry. They do it very well. We have some nice layers to this, but of course, with that lower ABV, it does come off neutered. And you know, it's kind of tragic. We almost never get whiskeys over 43% from Macallan. And if we do, it's going to be some overpriced, no age stated expression. A whiskey like this at 46% would be fantastic. We'd have more layers to it, more complexity, fuller flavors. It would just be a richer experience. But much like Dalmore, I don't think we're going to get Macallan to change. They already sell loads and loads of bottles, and I don't think they're very preoccupied with appeasing the loud, obnoxious whiskey fiends like you or I. They've already built themselves up as a status brand, and I think they make the most of their money from either casual consumers or hardcore collectors. And that's a shame because I do like the Macallan house style. Anyway, we've reached the end of our list. That was 5 whiskeys that have wasted their potential because they come in at 40% ABV. So, which whiskeys with lower ABVs bother you the most? Are there any whiskeys that you don't mind drinking at 40%? And do you think some of these lighter whiskeys have their merits? Let me know down below. I am interested in hearing some of your thoughts on this. Oh, and for those of you who stuck around to the end because you want to know which whiskey from the list made it into my glass, none of them. Bunnahabhain 12, 46.3%, affordable, beautifully sherried. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.